What's up again, everybody? Today I want to talk to you about a game that I stumbled across very recently and have been absolutely enjoying getting into and playing with my family and my friends. They absolutely love it, and so do I. This is Mage Noir. Mage Noir is a two-player card game where you and your opponent take on the role of mages, and you're basically sitting at the table with your friend, both of you at 20 health, and your job is to chuck spells, to create spells, and just chuck them at your opponent, reducing their life points to 0. And it sounds very familiar if you've played like Magic the Gathering. You're thinking, well, I've already played this sort of a game. What's the point? What's unique? What's different? And oftentimes I think you find when you play a mage versus mage, or like a wizard versus a wizard kind of a game, you end up playing this game where you as the player are just summoning creatures that fight, right? And you like your creatures go and fight against their line of creatures. There's a front line. You like play down some resources and just kind of sit there, and it feels very much like that. This is not like that really at all. In fact, there's a lot of familiar mechanics if you've played a game like Magic the Gathering, but they take it in a completely unique and interesting way. They twist it in such an interesting way that I was just floored when I was playing through it and learning how to play it with my friend. I literally played with my friend yesterday, and I played with my wife yesterday. Like on the same day, we played all 4 decks and had an absolutely great time. So let me talk to you about why I like the unique mechanics. And really, for me, the most unique mechanic in the game is this resource pool. So in the game, you're playing as a mage who's pulling resources from the ether. So pulling mana, exactly what it's called, mana from the ether. And let me slide these pre-constructed decks out of the way. By the way, the game here itself is actually on Kickstarter. It went live on Kickstarter like a day or two ago, and it sold it was fully funded in 3 hours. And it was funny because after my friend and I played it, we looked at each other. We played I think we played 3 games or something like that. We looked at each other and went, okay, so how much is this on Kickstarter? Because we immediately went and we bought like a 2 set. Like we bought we combined and bought the bundle that gets you 2 sets so that we could play it some more. So back to the thing. I'm sorry, I got distracted because this is super fun to talk about. This is your infinite ether, and as a player, you're pulling mana from it to use in the game. So the way that ends up working is, for example, when you sit down and you draw your hand of cards, your opponent draws their hand of cards, and it's your turn to start. After drawing a card like you would think would happen at the beginning of any turn, you're going to pick 3 of these mana sources. Let's say you want to pick vegetal mana and water mana and fire mana. Okay, these resources don't immediately just go to you. They're going to go into the available ether that both players have shared access to and will be creating over the course of the game. And the way this works is you're going to create 2 piles, and you're going to divvy these cards that you've selected out between those piles. So for example, you could put a red, and then you can put a blue, and then you could put a green, like that. Okay, once you've done that, you pick one of these piles to take and place in front of you as mana that you can use. So for example, if you wanted to grab this stack, you can do that. If you wanted to grab that stack, you can do that as well. So I take this stack, and now I have a fire mana and a vegetal mana to use to pay for my cards. So let's take a look at the cards, and then we'll revisit what this mana pool thing means in a nutshell. Let's look at the fire deck. This is a pre-constructed deck that they had a list for in the back of their rule book, and I'm just going to kind of show you what the cards look like, because honestly, this was actually what caught my attention in the first place. The way that the card design and the layout looks, it just reminds me of one of my favorite video games of all time. Old school video game, not really old school, it's still going. If you've ever played Guild Wars 2, this painterly paint splatter art style, I guess is the way you'd say it, just totally fits that same thing, where they do this white bordering with like either a dry brush or a paint splatter effect going through, and I love it. It looks fantastic. Now this right here that I'm holding is a prototype they sent out to me. So some of the art on these cards, let me see if I can find one. Some of the art is not final, but I will say I love just in general the aesthetic that they're going for. This makes me so sad. This is not the final art, and I absolutely love that art. I think it looks amazing. But this is actually supposed to be a ring you wear on your finger rather than like something like ethereal like that. Nevertheless, these are the cards that you could be playing within a deck. And if you look at them at a first glance, everything in this deck is a spell. And I know, again, like if you're thinking Magic the Gathering, well, everything in that game is called a spell. Well, in this game, everything really is a spell. There's very few examples of creatures. In fact, I think the only creature examples we have are in the Vegetal deck, where you like actually summon trees. Outside of that, you're just casting spells. And the way this works, if you look here in the top left, this is the cost that you have to pay in order to prepare the spell to throw at your opponent, okay? And then this, of course, is the thing that it does. So, for example, if you were able to pay 3 fire and 1 rock or mineral mana, then you could prepare this spell. But you'd also need one more thing, and you need this right here. So throughout the game, you're going to have these weaker spells, like this flame here, for example, that you can see cost nothing, and it does very little. It deals 1 damage to any target. Could be your opponent. I guess it could be you. I don't know why you'd want to hit yourself. It could be dealt to like one of the permanents that very few permanents can actually take damage, but are in the game. It also says is discarded when designated as a component for a spell, and that's what we're about to talk about. So when you prepare a spell, you pay its cost, like we were talking about with Magma Eruption. You pay its cost and you put it down in front of you. So this one has no cost, so I can put it down in front of you. After you've prepared it, you get a couple of choices. You can leave it there as a prepared spell, and you can wait to do stuff with it later. You can cast it for its effect. If you cast it, you would use the effect, it would go to discard, and then we'll talk about what happens when you do stuff with mana that you paid for it earlier. And then you can also choose to place it to the side, and I do it like this. I place it over to the side, and you use it as a component for a larger spell. So it no longer becomes a spell you can cast. You set it to the side, it stays over there basically until the end of the game unless some card says they can remove it. And once you use it as a component, it will sit there, and then you'll be able to reference that card. And what do I mean by that? Well, this is called Flame. Magma Eruption needs 3 cards that have been prepared, or 3 spells that have been set to the side like this to be used as a component. It needs 3 of those active on your side in order to cast it. In addition to those 3 components that it needs, it also needs 3 fire and 1 mineral mana. So what that would end up looking like would be something like this. I'll clear these out of the way. I would, at some point, I'd prepare the flame, and then, let's say I had 2 more of these. I also had 3 fire and 1 mineral. At that point, from my hand, I would take this Magma Eruption. I would prepare it by putting the fire and the mineral mana under it. This is how you prepare a spell. You place the cost that you have under the card you want to play or prepare. You put it down like this. You also take your components that you've had on the side and you reference them, okay? And then you choose to either cast the spell or use it as a component. I'm going to cast this spell, and I'm going to deal 7 damage to any target, which is huge. That's almost half of your opponent's health. I'm going to cast this at them. This would go to discard, and then you would, if nothing happens, like in this case, something would happen to the flame because of the text on it, but the components would stay off to the side after you've cast the spell. So you pay the cost, and then you cast the spell. So you're constantly in this state of like, okay, am I preparing these, like leaving them out here and waiting for later? Am I using cards to, or using spells to set them aside as components so I can never cast them again, never deal a damage, for example, with the flame, but I'm setting it over here so that I can reference them to make larger spells? Or am I just chucking them at my opponent and dealing damage? Here's the cool thing too. So that shared mana pool that I was talking about, let's put these back. Let's say this was the shared mana pool, right? After I cast Magma Eruption using these resources, using this mana here, when this goes to discard, I then take the mana that was under this and I distribute it back to the shared resource pool, back to the mana pool. And I have to do this in a specific way that's very interesting. I have to take all 4 of these, and I can start with any of these cards. I have to alternate between the piles, and I have to start with a smaller pile. So I'm going to end up going fire, mineral, fire, fire. Okay. Then my opponent on their turn would go through the same process. They'd draw a card. They would pick 3 mana types. Let's go with the arcane one over here. And they would choose where to put these on these stacks. They have to start with the smaller stack, and in this case there's 3 and 4. So they'd go Vegetal, Air, and what is it? Arcane. I just said it. And then they get to pick from these 2 stacks, which is really cool because, again, we're sharing resources. So there's this little mini game involved in, like, am I going to put what I need in this stack or try to sprinkle it around to both stacks because I hope at one point I'm going to take some from the other stack. So let's say that they take this stack. All of a sudden, on my opponent's next turn, they're going to have to start putting more mana into this stack. And if I cast spells, I have to start putting mana back into the available mana pool, alternating like that. And so you get these really cool swing turns where, like, someone just gets a whole bunch of mana that they've harvested from around them, you know, in the game. And they may not be able to use, you know, Vegetal mana because they're playing something that doesn't have any cards that reference that. But they can make trades to the mana pool by trading 2 for 1 that they want, and that would go into the same stack. And so there's this manipulation of mana that is really fun. You're concocting spells, and you're choosing to use spells to make other spells stronger, or you're choosing to use spells for their effect. There's a lot of cool references to just like this elemental play, and the different elements decks feel very unique in and of themselves. So for example, we'll take a look at those. The fire deck, the one that they have pre-constructed in the back, does feel very much like, okay, I'm going to kill you. That's my goal. I'm just going to cast spells on you. Draconic Flame inflicts 2 damage to any target. It makes it harder to do things with... It hits you, basically, if you use these things as components. Fiery Arrow deals 3 damage, and then if it has a special effect if you do the thing that we're about to talk about. Mental Flame is cool. You use it as a component. You set it off to the side rather than like doing anything with it. But in order to use this free thing as a component, you have to pay into it constantly with fire mana. So you continue to have to fuel that thing in order to like use it continually. Deals 3 damage. So exactly what you would think would be the case with the fire kind of deck ends up being the case. There are some really interesting things though. Most things are spells, right? In fact, these 2 are spells, but they're also pieces of equipment. So if you get this in your hand and you play this down, this piece of equipment will do something constantly. Consider it a permanent, you know, if you will. And in this case, this one, if a fire card you control would inflict damage to an opposing target, it deals that much damage +1 or +2 if you are a Mage Noir. And that's what we're about to talk about. Then it hits you for a damage. And this one's like my favorite. Fire Mask is so fun to play with because it allows you, if you put this down, to look at the top card of your deck at any time. I love looking at the top card of my deck. This was so much fun to play because you can cycle through your deck very, very well by doing this with the combination of Crimson Ritual. I should also talk about the Fire Whip. That's a really cool card as well. Let me see if I can find that. Fire Whip right here. Fire Whip is a weapon that if you put down just deals your opponent a point of damage each turn at the start of your turn. If you're a Mage Noir, which is the final form we're about to talk about, then inflicts 2 damage instead, which is cool. So that brings me, after talking about the fire deck, that brings me to the idea of becoming a like more powerful mage, or a black mage, a Mage Noir. In every deck, and in every, I don't want to say in every type, because really the mana types can be interchangeable, and we'll talk about that last. You can use multiple different types of mana. There's nothing locking you into playing one type of element over the other. But in every form and fashion, you can become a Mage Noir. And what that does is it'll basically unlock a second portion of text from a lot of different cards. So as you saw as I was flipping through, there's a card in here called Fiery Arrow, and Fiery Arrow deals 3 damage. All you need to do is pay 2 resources, 2 fire resources or fire mana, and have one flame component on the side of your board. So anything that has the word flame in it, and that's how components work. So like this has flame, the word flame in it. So if this was a component, you could count that as the one flame that you need for this card. Draconic Flame also has the word flame in it. So if you had that as a component, you could play Fiery Arrow, which is really cool. And you'll see it says, if you're a Mage Noir, inflict 4 damage instead. So by becoming a Mage Noir, like this card allows you to do, then you get extra benefits from certain cards in your deck. But you also get a fundamental change in the way that your character works. And in this instance, it says when this comes into play, lose half your current health points, rounded down, which is gross. But it also says, after you become a Mage Noir here, it says, during your turn, you can lose a health point to gain 1 fire mana and draw a card. So you pull a fire mana, and I believe you pull it from the way we played it is you pull it from the available ether. So if there's fire here in the available ether, you can gain this, lose a health, and draw a card. And it says you can do that multiple times per turn, which is insane. So as this fire player, when you become a black mage, when you become a Mage Noir, you get to start knocking yourself, drawing card after card after card. And if you're combining that, let's say, for example, with the Fire Mask, you're looking at the top card and then drawing it, looking at the top card and then drawing it. And then you set yourself up with a big turn and you just blast them in the face with some fire magic, which is so satisfying. It's so satisfying to play. On the water side of things, you're playing a bunch of cards that are permanents. As you can see here, it says permanent. You're playing a bunch of cards that are permanents, but as you're playing them, they're sitting out in the field, if you will, with their resource cost under them, and then you're doing some manipulation with the resources under them to set up like OTKs or like large combos with the mana that's under each of these permanent cards. So what that might look like, because I unfortunately experienced it several times, is this Tide card draws you a card, then discards you a card, and then you get to place the mana that you've put under this spell, of which it costs 2. So you've put 2 mana in order to play this under the spell. You place this under a different permanent, another spell you control. So like this, for example. There you go. We play this down, and then after you've played this card and done the text, instead of this mana going to the available ether back where people can draw it, it actually goes under a different card you control. And that's important. By the way, you can also cycle this. There's recursion in it, which is gross. You can pay a water mana to put this, put another Tide back into your, is it into your hand? Yeah, into your hand. So if you have multiple Tides in your deck, you can be cycling them. But what you can end up doing is using those mana that are under those cards to play something absolutely gross. You play a card like this. Here we go. I found it. Torrential Rain. Torrential Rain says at the end of your turn, choose any number of water mana locked under this permanent. They are released to the available ether and inflict 1 damage per mana released this way. So if you use that Tide effect to put mana under Torrential Rain, let's say you had a bunch of mana under Torrential Rain. As you can see, there's just a boatload that you're going to have to put under there just to cast this and then put it down. Once you do that, then you just send it all back at the end of your turn, and your opponent just starts exploding, especially because you can stack up. It just doesn't deal 1. You can make it deal 2 as well by playing certain other cards. This is a really fun one. Water felt really good. There's some life gain to help you stabilize and go forward throughout the game if you're playing against something that's trying to rush you down. And then you try to set up these combos, draw into these combos, do things with water mana that are super interesting. You can use water as components to other spells rather than just finding those spells. It was a really cool one. I'm going to talk about the air. The air deck was really interesting as well. You start with these cards called like Blow or Favorable Winds, and they reference for like multiple copies of that card. So Blow 2 is needed to cast this, plus 3 wind mana. and you're setting yourself up to play these giant things like Typhoon, for example, which is a mixture of water and air and needs 2 wind components. It deals 6 damage and it discards 3 spells in preparation, which means if your opponent has prepared a bunch of spells but not decided what to do with them, like cast them or use them as components, you just get to get rid of them. They go away. Unfortunately, it sends one of your own components back to your deck, third from the top. So you're playing these large spells in air, but over time you're taking away your components, so you have to recast them, which is very interesting. It's like this kind of risk-reward thing, because can you play like Airblade, for example, and deal 3 damage, but can you send some of your components back to your deck and hope to draw them soon enough again so that you can deal damage to your opponent again without them killing you in the process, like while you're a little weakened. Of course, there's equipment for air as well, and can only be prepared by a Mage Noir, so you have to become a Mage Noir. But then it reduces the cost of some of your things, which is great in this deck because things do cost a lot. And then finally, in the base game of Mage Noir on Kickstarter right now, there's Vegetal Mana, and this is one I actually haven't played with yet. Vegetal Mana is seed-based, so here's some seeds. And there's Sprouted Seed as well, and these count as a drop component, which is interesting because drop is a component that a spell that you're looking to make a component in the water deck. So there's some natural kind of trade over there that you could combine decks with. But what you're doing with this, and let me see if I can find one. By the way, look at this art. This art is insanely good. Look at that. That looks so cool. Druid horns. Love it. So with this, you're able to create, where is it? I want to get to this is like the one class that has these animated trees. These are permanents, as you can see, because it says permanent. You would need 1 seed, 3 vegetal mana, and 1 water mana, because you got to water it. And then this has 3 health, and this is like a creature almost. When you put it into the field, discard the seed that was used as a component, because it grows, right? You can't, once you grow the seed, you can't get a seed back. At the beginning of your turn, inflict 2 damage to the opponent. Then you can put 1 seed from your discard pile onto the field. And this is Protector, so it redirects damage from the opponent directed at me to itself, so it soaks up damage. And this is not a permanent in the sense that I'm gonna choose to attack you and then I'm gonna defend, that sort of thing. This is the permanent in the sense that it's kind of like a wall that also deals damage over time. So think of it as like a clock that protects you as well, right? Over time it deals 2 damage. And that's what's interesting. This game doesn't play into the normal sort of card game trope where you're creating creatures that go and fight for you. You're the one doing the fighting. And even like a King of Trees, that has another permanent tree, 5 health. It, at the beginning of your turn, inflicts 2 damage to the opponent for every tree on the board. This is not a creature like you would think of in most card games, and that is what I love. This feels different, fundamentally different to play. The shared resources is super fun to try and kind of like wrap your head around. You end up with way more resources like in the middle game, so you feel like you have a lot of things that you can do at your disposal. And the fact that you can kind of like mulligan some of those resources away by trading, it's just really, really fun. This is a great game to pick up via Kickstarter because, in fact, maybe it's the perfect kind of a Kickstarter game because while there is some deck building aspects to it, like all of these cards can be incorporated into decks. Really, all of these cards can be incorporated into the other decks. Like Mist Blow is blue, but it could go into an air deck. Wave of Flames, if there's something in water that's looking to reference wave, even though this is about fire and does damage like fire, you could also put this into a water deck. Like there's all of Seed in the Wind. There's all these things that could be mixed up. But because even though with this stuff that's available to you, it's still just as easy to pick this up and just jam a couple of games with your friends. I think it's fantastic. It's not one of those games that's going to require you to go out and buy pack after pack after pack, which if you already have one of those games, this may be a great supplemental experience for you because you have that one game that does that, and then you have this game that's easy to pick up, play, and put back down, pick up, play, and put back down. You can build these precons, and we had a fantastic time playing the precons. So I can't recommend this enough. I'm going to be playing it a lot more. I'm thinking about it a lot right now, in fact. And I hope you guys give this a try. I'll put a link down to the Kickstarter down in the description so that you can go and check out the Kickstarter. Like I said, it funded in 3 hours. I think there may be a stretch goal or two that they're pushing for right now, and you may, if you hurry, there may be an early bird special that you can hop in on the price for. But yeah, I picked it up immediately, and I don't really buy stuff on Kickstarter. And this was one. I mean, I have the cards in front of me here, but I want the full and complete product. And it's going to come with 2 other decks, one for this mana source and one for this mana source as well. So that is Mage Noir. I really enjoyed it. This is a French game. I forgot to mention that at the beginning. It's from France, and they sent me this out from France. So I say huge thank you to the Mage Noir team for sending this out and letting me try it. I'm a big fan, and I hope you guys watching at home give it a shot as well. As always, everybody, thanks for watching.